Dr. Shabir, when I look at the story of Ishmael, I see that Ishmael is given a very prominent place in the Quran and a not so prominent place in the Bible. So tell me about Ishmael, how he's viewed in the two traditions.
Yeah, in the Quran, Ishmael is not mentioned by name so often. The son of Abraham is mentioned, and Ishmael is thought to be the son that is mentioned in the story of the sacrifice. Elsewhere, he is mentioned.
That's okay, right there. That's a difference right there between the Bible and the Quran. That son in the Bible is Isaac, and in the Quran, they're thinking that it's Ishmael.
Thought to be the son that is mentioned in the story of the sacrifice. Elsewhere, he is mentioned by name, for example, in the 19th chapter of the Quran, where God shows that he was a righteous person, and God gave him prayer and charity, and he commanded his progeny to do the same. In the Bible, the stories are told more extensively about all of the prophets, and the Quran only needs to refer to those stories elusively to bring out the lessons that could be brought out from these stories following the Quranic line of thought. But even in the Bible, the story of Ishmael, compared with others around him, seems to be diminished, especially in comparison with his brother Isaac, which is a curious phenomenon because Ishmael was the firstborn son of Abraham, according to the biblical narrative itself. And so you would expect him to have a greater prominence, but he doesn't. The prominence shifts to Isaac, who...
Because Ishmael was the son of Hagar, Sarai's handmaiden, right? So I guess it was looked at as less important. He was looked at as less important because God had promised the child to Sarah and Abraham.
To have a greater prominence, but he doesn't.
So maybe that's why Isaac has more of the prominence, because that's what God, in the Bible, that's what God intended. He still did bless Ishmael.
The prominence shifts to Isaac, who comes to be known as the ancestor of the Israelite nation, and Ishmael, by comparison, is said to be a great person, and that he will have many descendants.
Right.
But he will also be a wild donkey of a man whose hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him.
And in contrast, in the Quran, Ishmael in the Islamic tradition is seen as sort of the ancestor, right? The ancestor of the Prophet Muhammad and the Muslims. Many Arabs.
So in Islamic tradition, Ishmael gets a large mention.
Yes.
And Isaac not so much mentioned. So as if the Islamic tradition, in a way, counterbalances and
that is cool.
Fits nicely in with the Judeo-Christian tradition, showing the prominence that both sons should have.
Now, it seems as if Ishmael's story within the Quran begins with Abraham leaving them in some sort of barren land, which appears to be Mecca. Right?
Yes, in the 14th chapter of the Quran, Abraham prays and says, God, I have settled my descendants in a land that is not cultivated, so please you provide for them and cause the hearts of people to be inclined towards them. But he says he's leaving them there for a purpose, so that they would worship God. It's as if there is an attempt here.
So like it's a barren land, you have nothing to do, so you turn to God in your solitude.
That they would worship God. It's as if there is an attempt here to plant a new place of worship. I'm using a terminology here from Christian thinking in that somebody may say I'm planting a new church. They go to a new area where there's no church, and then by their very presence there, they're going to establish a Christian community.
So that's what Abraham wanted to do.
A church, yes. So Abraham was planting his descendants in a barren region where people would not have come otherwise, so that in that area God can be worshipped as well.
How does that story appear in the Bible?
In the Bible, it takes on a different coloring in that the story goes that Ishmael was born first, and when he was about 13 years old, Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to Isaac. So Isaac was the second son. When Isaac was being weaned, probably he was about 2 years old, Ishmael was laughing at him or playing with him. The term yetzchak in Hebrew is ambiguous. It could mean either way. If it's taken to be mocking him, then this is more likely to explain Sarah's behavior, because Sarah then says, drive out this slave woman and her son. I won't allow her son to inherit along with my son. And it's in response to this that Abraham then takes his wife and Hagar and her son and leaves them in the barren area. And in fact, it is said that God told Abraham, listen to your wife, which in a way it's a good commandment, listen to your wife. But in this specific circumstance, one struggles to see the morality of it. Like, how would it be right to
leave a woman and her child in a barren wasteland, right? And it was your decision to have a child with this woman, right? It's not the woman's fault that she has a son now, and now you have Isaac, right?
Struggles to see the morality of it. Like, how would it be right to leave this woman and her child with only a small supply of water, which eventually will run out.
It seems like they would be destined to die in that situation. Yeah?
It would seem so, had it not been for miraculous intervention and God sending an angel to give the provision.
So in the Islamic tradition, there's the Zamzam that arises, right?
Yes,
the water. Is that in the Bible as well?
Zamzam.
Yes,
Okay.
It's in the Bible, and in the Islamic tradition, the well is referred to as Zamzam, and that well continues to provide water to this day. Pilgrims from all over the world gather to Mecca, and they perform the sacred rites at what is called the Masjid al-Haram, which is a mosque around the Kaaba. There is the well of Zamzam.
Okay, so they know that's most like, okay, that is Mecca. What the? That's cool. I didn't know that.
And where it is related in Islamic tradition that Hagar was running between two mountains, two hills, you might say, to use them as vantage points to see if maybe there's a passing caravan, anybody with some water to quench the thirst of her child. Muslim pilgrims to this day, men and women, traverse the same track, and men in particular are encouraged to run between two green lights that mark the place where in Islamic tradition it is said that Hagar ran between the two hillocks.
So let's talk about that sacrifice, the great sacrifice, which we hear about in both the Bible and the Quran. How are the stories similar, and how are they different?
So they're similar in that in both the Quran and the Bible, Abraham goes to offer a sacrifice to God, and this sacrifice happens to be his very son, whom he loves so dearly. And that is a proof of Abraham's great faith. He's not withholding from God even his beloved son. Now, some differences arose between the Muslim and Christian retelling of this, and of course the biblical retelling. In the Bible, we read in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1, that God said to Abraham, Abraham, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering to God. Burnt offering is a reference to the way in which the animals were sacrificed at that time.
I like this guy. I like his demeanor, his calm approach to the way he's explaining everything. I like this guy. This guy's cool.
Burnt offering is a reference to the way in which the animals were sacrificed at that time. They were not only killed, but also the flesh was burnt as a burnt offering to God. In the Islamic tradition, when a sacrifice is done, an animal sacrifice, that is, human sacrifice is totally prohibited in both traditions. But when Muslims offer an animal sacrifice, we eat of the meat ourselves and we share it also to family and friends, because it is stressed in the Islamic tradition. In the Quran itself, it says that the flesh and blood of the sacrificial victim does not reach God. It is your piety that God is concerned about. So we can...
That makes more sense to me. Because I always wondered, why would God care about some lamb, right? I mean, yeah, you get the best of the best lamb to give to God, right? That's because you're sacrificing something. That's nothing to do with God wants the best of the best lamb, right? It's about your piety, not the actual...
Does not reach God. It is your piety that God is concerned about.
That makes sense to me.
So we can benefit from the meat itself as a provision from God.
Right. So in those days, did they not eat of the meat from the sacrifice? They just let it burn straight through? I think that's how it went, right?
It's just this dedication going through this ritual that God...
But then is it a sacrifice at that point? Because you're not sacrificing something. You're just cooking it and you're going, like you said, the dedication.
From God. It's just this dedication going through this ritual that God is interested in.
So I understand there's some confusion about, first of all, which son it was, right? Well, this is the big confusion actually, that, was it Isaac, was it Ishmael? Muslims seem to think it was Ishmael, right?
Many Muslims think that, yes. In classical Islamic interpretations of the Quran, we see both opinions. We see some scholars, and it seems that this was a very early opinion, that Muslim scholars like At-Tabari, for example, favored the view that Isaac was the son to be sacrificed.
I would lean towards that, right? If it's not for certain in the Quran, right? It's left unnamed, right? And it says it's just Abraham's son instead of Ishmael or Isaac. And then you have a whole other text saying that it's Isaac. I would lean towards it being Isaac then, right?
And that, of course, follows from knowing what the Jews and Christians were saying about this. Later Muslim scholars, such as Ibn Kathir, argued on good grounds that the son to be sacrificed was Ishmael, looking at clues within the Quranic text itself. And I'm convinced by that reading of it.
He's convinced that it's Ishmael. I would like to know what those Quranic texts are and the context of them, and to see to why he thinks that it's Ishmael and not Isaac. Hopefully he mentioned something a little bit like that
especially as described by Imam As-Suyuti in his Al-Hawi Lil-Fatawi, his collection of Islamic verdicts. So taking the son to be Ishmael, that has become the majority view, and it makes good sense, especially when we see the wording in Genesis chapter 22 verse 1, where it says, take your son, your only son, because the only time there was an only son is when Ishmael was the only son. For some 14 years. And then Isaac was born, and now Abraham had two sons. So one might say, well, only son Isaac could mean that Abraham has banished the other son, and theoretically there's only one son. But the Bible does confirm that Ishmael was still the son of Abraham. And that's how the Bible refers to him, not as someone of lower status than a son. So he was the only son. Now, it is interesting that in the biblical narrative, Abraham says to the son, we're going to offer a burnt offering, and the son says, but Dad, where is the animal that we're going to...
How old is this son? We haven't gotten to that part when we're reading in our Bible Study With Me live session. But that'd be interesting to know, right? Because Ishmael and Hagar left when Ishmael was 13, did he say? And was that when Isaac was born when Ishmael was 13? But I'd be curious to know, how old was the child when he was supposed to be sacrificed, right? And was he older than when Ishmael had left? or younger, and then that could be a way to determine which son it was.
To sacrifice. Of the biblical narrative, Abraham says to the son, we're going to offer a burnt offering, and the son says, but Dad, where is the animal that we're going to sacrifice? And Abraham is a little bit evasive in answering the son. In the Quran, the story is from the start that Abraham sees a dream that he's sacrificing his son. And then he says to his son, I see this dream. You tell me, what do you think about this? And then the son says, Ya abati fa'al ma tu'mar.
Wow, this is a lot different.
سَتَجِدُنِي إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مِنَ الصَّابِرِينَ. So in the 37th chapter of the Quran, where the son says, my father, do what you are commanded, and you will find me, God willing, to be one of those who are patient. So the son, in the Quranic narrative, knew what was going to happen, and he wanted to be part of that, and he was deliberately allowing himself to be sacrificed in this way.
It's a very moving account.
It
you describe
it is.
Yeah.
And it shows the communication that should take place between father and son, especially when
think
we're
about the
about to do
maturity
something
level
for
of
God.
the son.
We want to all do it together as a family, everyone in cooperation. Shows the willingness of the son. And then, of course, as the story now unfolds in both the Bible and the Quran, God provides the animal to be sacrificed instead. And that demonstrates that God does not want us to sacrifice our children. That God does not demand human sacrifices. And in fact, in the Bible itself, it is very clear that human sacrifice is prohibited. And it is the animal sacrifice that remains in the tradition. This has remained firmly in the Islamic tradition, especially seeing that the Arabs thought that they were descendants of Ishmael. They wanted to maintain that tradition, and in the Islamic faith, this becomes a cornerstone of our Eid celebration.
Lots more we could talk about, including the fact that Ishmael with Abraham built the Kaaba and that they were in Mecca, which is not something that's not described in the Bible, but we have to end it there. So thank you for your time, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
You should check out
We have to end it there.
one of these two, actually. That'll be cool. Yeah, that was really interesting. That was really interesting. What did you guys think about that? Huh? I found that really interesting. Learned a lot of new things there, and let me know down in the comment section. Who do you think was the child that was sacrificed? Was it Isaac, or was it Ishmael? Let me know down below. What do you guys think? And I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.